Alexandria, this is our first of our new year. We really appreciate everyone coming. Agenda Alexandria is launching the 2024-2025 season. We've got a bunch of great programs on the agenda, and I want to go through a little bit of them, and then I'm going to introduce our co-chairman, Ricardo Alfaro, who's working the tech in the back of the room. So this may be the best panel, September 23rd. This is probably going to be the best panel. It's all downhill after this, right? So if you stick around after the highlight here, October 28th, we have a panel on development in Alexandria, very controversial topic. In fact, I think we've already got our panelists, Jeff Farner, Eric Wagner, Terry Clower from George Mason University, very excited about the October 28th panel on development. The Lyceum is actually not available in October because I think they're doing some renovations here, so we'll be back at the Masonic Memorial on October 28th. We're really looking forward to that. We also have the November program is going to be virtual. We're doing kind of a hybrid this year where we're having most of our programs in person like this. We're also having some virtual programs, so our November program is virtual. We haven't set a date on that yet, but it's about social media. Very interesting topic. And we've got Steve Davidson. Raise your hand. Where did Steve Davidson go? Over here, yeah. So if you have thoughts, Ricardo is doing that. I'm sorry. I got my list all screwed up. So if you have some thoughts about social media in Alexandria and maybe topics we should talk about in the panel, hit Ricardo up. Steve Davidson is handling our March Agenda Alexandria, which is about public safety and EMT. We're hoping to have all kinds of EMT vehicles and firefighters and police vehicles kind of on display, so we're really looking forward to that. Stay tuned on that. In this room. No, actually, we're not going to do it in this room, but that would be kind of cool. Then looking ahead to 2025, our April panel, which is on April 28th, is about complete streets and bike lanes. So obviously one of the most controversial issues in Alexandria. Really looking forward to that. Put that on your calendar, April 28th. Then in May, we are having our last panel of the year is about elections, and so we got a big election this year. I think we're probably still going to be talking about elections well into 2025. Of course, 2025 is a big election year in Virginia because we'll elect the governor, the attorney general, the lieutenant governor, the House of Delegates, and so the May 19th meeting will also be our election. So Agenda Alexandria is a member organization. We elect all of our executives, and so we're going to be having, in addition to our discussion about elections, we're also going to be having our election on May 19th. So put that on your calendar. And now I'm going to before we introduce our panel, actually one more thing. I want to give a shout out to one of our panelists, James Labresco. If you look at the Alexandria Gazette back here, we've got tons of copies with it has the election guide. He spent a lot of time interviewing all 9 candidates. I think we've got one candidate here, right? I saw Mason Butler somewhere. Two candidates here. So thank you both for coming. And James Labresco did a great job in getting them on the record in terms of what they support, what they oppose. So definitely, we have a huge stack. So please take some, and they're in the back of the room over here. And I am going to turn the microphone over to my co-chairman, and he's going to introduce our panel.
Well, I don't know if I'll introduce a panel, but stick around. So hi, everyone. I am Ricardo Alfaro. I am the other co-chair for this year. And you may be wondering, like, okay, so since when does Agenda do co-chairs? Well, the fact of the matter is that Agenda has gone through different transformations, right? We were a member-driven organization mainly before the pandemic. The pandemic happened, we switched online, and now we've switched back in person. We've had several kind of tryouts here and there on how to do the in-person. We've had great successes. Last season was like we had this space packed in several occasions, and we got great coverage. But the fact of the matter is that we are a member-driven organization, as Michael indicated. So that means that we really need everyone's support to continue going. If you noticed, as Michael was reading the programs, you heard us talk about October, you heard us talk about November, you heard us talk about March, April, and May. But usually we do 8 programs a year. Those are not 8 programs a year. And the fact is that that is a reality of what Agenda Alexandria is going through. We are going through a transformation that really relies on the members. So please consider either becoming a member. If you have any questions to become a member, please see us at the back at the end of the program. We would be happy to get your contact information. For those of you who have, be that small businesses that want to become a sponsor, please consider as well talking to me or to anyone here from the board, which actually brings me up to the following. Can the board members here of Agenda stand up so that you all can see them? There you go. So the program that you're going to see tonight is actually crafted by board members. The way that Agenda Alexandria works is that the strength of our organization really relies on the cohesiveness of that board members to bring in great panelists to have these programs offered to you. So if you are also interested in participating as a board member, please also see us at the end, or again, as becoming a member. Before we begin, I do want to thank some sponsors. It's a large list, and also this brings up a good opportunity to explain a little bit about how membership works. Membership right now works on a rolling basis, which means that if you renewed, by renewal I mean like $50 or more, September 2023 onwards, you're still a member in good standing. But it's on a rolling basis. So if you renewed in September of last year and you come in October of next month, then you should renew, because that's when your rolling basis expires. So again, I highly encourage everyone to become a member, because that's really what continues to drive this organization forward. I do want to thank our presenting sponsors, Simpson Development and the Zebra newspaper. Tonight we are cross-sharing the live stream with the Zebra newspaper. Our gold sponsors, Mary Moon, Linda and Steve App, thank you again. And our sustaining sponsors, it's a long list. I apologize ahead of time if I mispronounce any of these names. Alice Hart, Arthur Peabody, Bill Rosello, Karosian Diana Ryan, Christopher Brown, Christopher Ullman, Connie Hart, Darylyn Franklin, Dave McClure, who's also doing the sound back there from Delray Dave, David Millard, David Speck, Eileen Aherd, Elizabeth Seltzer, Elgene Searle, Ginny Franco, Harriet McCune, Helen Clark, Henry Brooks, Janet Barnett, Jim Roberts, John Woods and Donna Kramer, Kenneth Gray, Mark Williams, Marty Bickford, Mary Ann Way, Mary Harris, Michael Crifasi, Robert Test, Robert Whittle, Rod Kukrow, Roy Bird, Steve Davidson, Tim Laderack, Tom Kopko, and Walter Howell III. Again, I want to thank all of our sustaining members again, and encourage everyone here to become either a member, sustaining member. You can do so at agendaalexandria.org. And again, part of what we're doing is a member-driven organization. So as Michael indicated, come May, we are planning to resume the typical process, how we go about involving our members in that annual meeting of a sort of our membership. The way that this works tonight, if you haven't been to an Agenda Alexandria program, is that we have sticky notes and we have pens. If you have a question, please write it down. And some of you may ask, why do we go about with the pen and paper system? Why don't we just have a wireless microphone and carry it around? Most of the time, what we do is that we integrate that into the discussion, and that way we're able to not have a full-length all-nighter here. We are time constrained by how much time we have in this space, so we will greatly appreciate that you will handwrite in somewhat legible font, please, your questions. So with that, Michael, I'll turn it back to you so you can get the program started.
All right, well, there's only one thing left to do, which is introduce our moderator. We are really pleased to welcome a individual who is probably familiar to most people in this room, former school board member. He's got a great Substack. I highly encourage you to hit the subscribe button on his Substack. Mark Eaton, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. It's really an introduction. It's more than I deserve. As a former parent, former school board member, and former teacher at what is now Alexandria City High School, I'm very glad to be with you. The mayor once introduced me as a former everything, so such are the joys of one's twilight years. We have, I think, a very, very interesting panel this evening, and I would like to introduce them and then tell you a little bit about what you can expect, and then we'll get off to the races here. On the far left is Carmen Sanders, who is the Executive Director of Instructional Support for the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Leadership. Carmen joined the school system in 2012. I knew her as an administrator at the then former T.C. Williams High School, and I had always the highest regard for Carmen. I thought she was among the best listeners of the administrative staff, which, if you think about it, is quite a challenge because much of what administrators do is sending, not receiving, but Carmen is excellent at both. To Carmen's left is James Labresco, who is an editor of Theogony, close to my heart. I was the Theogony advisor at the high school for 13 years. And James is already carving out a distinguished career in journalism online, in Theogony, and in the Gazette and the Alexandria Times. And James, I think, is also a basketball player, right? Yeah. So welcome, James. Channeling a lot of my interests. To James's left is Sophie Humer, who joined the school system in 2020. Sophie is the director of the Office of Capital Programs, Planning, and Design Services. She is principally concerned with capital projects, enrollment forecasting, and the like. She's a nerd of the first order and is from Southern Virginia, and assumed her current position, I believe, in February of this year. Is that right? Okay, so congratulations on that, and welcome. And then to Sophie's left and my immediate right is Erin Thomas. We're very glad to have Erin with us this evening. Erin is an involved parent of two children at Polk Elementary School, two daughters at Polk Elementary School, and has been active in the PTA and has views about capacity and allocation of resources in the school system, and we're glad to have you aboard. So thanks, Erin. I want to begin by saying that this is probably not the typical Agenda Alexandria evening. My experience with the organization is that the preferred model is an issue on which there can be pro and con discussion at a reasonable and rational way, out of which will come illumination for people to make decisions about what they think is the best course forward for the city. We don't have that for you this evening. I don't think there is a pro and con discussion that you can have about the school system because it is so complex and does so many different things for so many different constituencies. I think I don't know anybody who is debating the school system on a pro and con basis. It's sort of a category error, like trying to indict a squirrel for trespassing. It just doesn't sort of work. So what I think you'll get tonight is a perspective on the school system, which I think of as a kaleidoscope. And we all have our different viewing devices. It looks different to you as a student, as a parent, as a school board member, as an administrator, whatever your situation may be. An additional word for those who might be looking on or tuning in or whatever the term is, who have the reflexive feeling, what's this got to do with me? I don't have children in the schools. My immediate response would be to cite one of our beloved city council members who said, I thought very perceptibly, you know, Mark, the schools are the biggest check we write. It is by far the largest budget category of expenditure for the city, and so if you're even casually interested in how your tax dollars are being spent, you probably have some passing interest in what's going on with the school system. So with that, and with taking time to say thanks to all the Agenda Alexandria volunteers, normally it would be the students from the TV production programs who are televising tonight. We couldn't get them, so thanks very much to the folks who are handling the technical end and everybody else from Agenda Alexandria. Let's get started. So today, a communication went out to ACPS families that the King Street and Minnie Howard campuses have been placed on hold status due to an alleged threat related to the school building. Families are being updated. APD has completed the threat assessment and can determine that the school building is safe and that threats were unfounded. Regrettably, this seems to be the latest in a series of threats, some on social media. Panel, any reactions? Any thoughts?
Were you at school today, James?
Yeah. So I was in my third period class, which was newspaper. I was actually sitting in the hall working on an article. Everyone should go read it tomorrow. We interviewed Noah Lyles from the Olympics. So yeah, but I was editing that with one of my staff writers, and we were told by someone who I had never seen before, I think they were a central office administrator, walking in the halls and said, everyone has to go in their classes. If you're sitting in the halls, go inside. So we didn't really know what was happening, and it's always scary when something like that is happening in today's world. And as a student, a lot of the times, you don't feel safe at school. And that's not an ACPS problem, that's a United States problem. But you really don't feel safe at school when something like that is happening. And yeah, so I would say that a big factor that contributes to that is that there's so much unknown. There's no specifics in the messages we hear from our teachers, from our administrators. It's more, something's happening, we can't tell you what, but something's happening. And that creates an atmosphere that can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. And we later learned that it was just like fourth-hand knowledge of someone who overheard someone who overheard someone who overheard someone. And there was no viable anything. But from a student standpoint, obviously, it's always scary when that happens.
Panelists, you're going to have to lean into the mic or draw the mics towards you a little bit, I'm told. James, I understand what you're saying, and I would also, just for the record, this is a crime that and my understanding is that, and I think, Carmen, you said something about this to me offline, was that the school system regards it as such. Okay. All right, ACPS now has 2 large high schools, if not in name. The Minnie Howard Campus of Alexandria City High School has been operating for almost exactly a month. I think school began on the 18th of August, and here we are on the 23rd of September. It's 300,000 impressive square feet. If you're going up King Street, you see it looming over Bradley Shopping Center. If you're going up Braddock Road, you can't miss it. It's an impressive building. How are things going?
Okay. I only have one class at Minnie, but I do know a lot of my friends have their whole schedules there. So, first of all, I just want to say it's a really incredible building. It truly is. Just the natural light and the creative spaces throughout the building that are kind of flexible spaces like couches and just lounge areas. It's a really nice building to be in. In terms of how it's going, I would say it's fine. Things aren't going to be perfect right away, as we all know, but there have been major issues with transportation because our school is treated as one high school. So a lot of people have classes at one campus in the morning, and then their next period is at the other campus, and then some people have to go back and forth even one or two more times after that. And that adds to a lot of missed instructional time. So if you drive or walk down Braddock Road, you'll see during transition periods, there's probably hundreds or so students walking back and forth, and it's a very dangerous road, as everyone here knows. And yeah, there's supposed to be buses, but they take a really long time a lot of the time, stuff like that. So that is the big looming, something that's not going so well. But overall, I would say it's fine. Just like a normal school year, just have a little extra caveat, I guess, with the transportation. So.
Carmen, I'm going to direct this question your way. One of the things that's new with the new Minnie Howard is the academically themed academies. How's that going?
I would say that it is something that is incredibly innovative, and it is going well. I liken it to us building a house. And if you've ever done a new build, you know that once the house settles, you can start seeing cracks and nail pops and things of that nature, and things that can be improved throughout the process. And so now we have these 6 premier academies, and we see that there are opportunities for us to refine.
Could you describe a couple of them?
Sure. We have visual, performing, and applied arts, business and government, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We have general studies, and that's our on-ramp for students who are not necessarily sure what academy themed education they want to go into. We also have, I should know this. Thank you, global studies, and that sits our world languages as well as our kind of social studies themed, and then our Education, Liberal Arts, and Human Services Academy. So these 6 premier academies are starting us off, and it is very important in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and our governor has made it so, that students have a very clear college, career, and civic pathway. And so that is the work that we are doing to continue to refine those. But based on the information that I've received, not only from administration but staff members, is that it is really helping students find a sense of belonging, helping them to truly identify a path forward.
Okay.
Sure. As far as the actual building goes, it's been great to hear feedback from James and from teachers and administrators about how they're using the building, when they're in it. We've had a little bit of growing pains, I think, with the pickup and drop off, as well as there's an early childhood center co-located on the site, which has actually been, I think, a big positive for the school. It just comes with its own operational challenges. as far as the building's going, it's doing very well. We're on phase 2 of the demo right now, which is
Of the old building.
Of the old building, where all the new fields are going to be, as well as the geothermal well field, which is really going to drive a lot of the sustainability performance of the building. Hopefully, set it up to be a net zero building in the future. With regard to transportation, that's definitely something we hear from teachers, administrators, students. And while I don't necessarily represent that side of the house, I do have a hand in the transportation, in the general transportation planning. And ACPS is set up on a 2-tier bell schedule, and that really compresses the routes. It makes it hard for drivers. They often have to double back for routes. And it's just not an efficient system. And so that's something that the school system has been looking at for a little bit of time, and is probably going to be on our agenda sometime this spring to really look at, Fairfax. I think Fairfax has a lot of tiers, but I think Arlington has a 3-tier model that they just went to, and have been successful on top of this nationwide bus driver shortage that is really kind of straining our transportation system at the moment.
Okay. All right. So, since I'd like to push us back, say, 20 years. Since the fall of 2004, the school system has opened or rebuilt the King Street campus, Minnie Howard, formerly a 9th grade center and now essentially a high school building, Douglas MacArthur, Jefferson Houston, Patrick Henry, and Ferdinand Day. Taken collectively, in 20 years, there's been a significant rebuilding of the school system's overall physical plant. Is the school system overbuilt? Aaron?
If we look in the West End, I think that we're seeing critical overutilization, so I have to say no. I think if we look to the end of last year at Polk and Patrick Henry and Samuel Tucker, which are Cluster A, they were all at 115% utilization or more. We've just had the K-8 study come out and talk about the impacts of overutilization, and 2 that are particularly felt as the loss of encore services. At Polk, we added homerooms to add capacity to meet this utilization, and that means we lost art classrooms and got art on a cart. And this past school board, another key thing that was brought up at Patrick Henry, they're having to have 3 classes in PE at a time, which can be 80 kids with 2 PE teachers. And they highlighted that they're not getting PE, they're getting walking because of the discipline issues when you have that many kids stuffed into a PE or a gym. So that's an area that we're seeing in the West End. It's pretty bad.
Okay. Sophie, you spend a lot of time worrying about capacity.
I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot. So if we start at the beginning, 2004, does anybody have a guess as to what the student population was in 2004?
About 10K.
Yeah, it was about 10,500. So we're at 16,000, too close to the microphone, 16,400 now. If you look at what's been built over the past couple of years, we've added, not couple of years, but past 20 years, we've also introduced Ferdinand T. Day. It's a net new elementary school, again, on the West End, but it's still, if you look at the boundary analysis that we did in 2023, it's still not enough for capacity on the West End. I'll also say that there are schools on the East End that are overutilized. If you look at the population of people under 18 in the city of Alexandria, you actually get a little bit of a crescent. You start on the West End, you kind of come down the Duke Street corridor, and then you go up Route 1 into the Chiralagua-Arlandria neighborhood. So it's a system-wide challenge that we have to systematically start to look at. That includes redistricting, the K-8 analysis, looking at options within our CIP. And so I don't think we're overbuilt. I think also the way that teachers teach and the way that we use buildings has changed. We have a lot more EL services. We have a lot more specialized educational services. And those services are really important to have their own space. And that's part of not only the ed specs from all the way back in 2014, but is also kind of continuing now into 2024 as we start to look at our new schools.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit. We do have some really great ELL services, and it's particularly profound in the West End. 6 of our 8 Title I schools are over there, so we feel it particularly when this over-utilization is there. I give a slight challenge in that if we look the spread, there is some all over, but particularly the West End. We can look to the East End and we can see 3 schools that are only at 75% utilization. We can look at 3 schools that only have 330 students or less. So we definitely feel it harder in the West End. And, using your kaleidoscope metaphor, we could look at closing George Mason, putting students in Douglas MacArthur and at Cora Kelly, and they would just be at 100% utilization. I don't think that's the path to go, but I know those schools need some, need to be rebuilt and need to be modernized. But those are things that I think we have to look at.
Enrollment, where's it going?
I'm sorry, my charts didn't get to mark on time because I had a couple, but so enrollment is expected to. So let me start with this. Prior to COVID, we were seeing year over year 2% growth in the enrollment, as kind of demonstrated by the 10,000 to 16,000 students. Since COVID, that's plateaued a little, and that's had an impact on the model. So you don't see that repetitive growth injected into that model, and so enrollment will likely increase in the next 5 years as students come back into the school system. Birth rate data is also something to really look at. Alexandria actually had a positive birth rate, so year over year. There were actually more births than last year, and so that will have an impact in 5 years, right? That number of students coming into kindergarten. So I'm expecting it to plateau around the 1,600, 500 in the next 5 years, and then in projections as you get year over year out, they're much harder to predict, especially at a school system level where your data set is so small. I would expect that to plateau, and so marrying that to the CIP is really difficult, to be honest. And so I think what you can expect, though, is a larger share of English language learner students, especially as national policy starts to impact the region. I think, Alexandria is growing as well in its development. With just new efforts by the redevelopment housing agency, especially in the Arlandria Chiralagua area, and then as Mr. Thomas notes, Monday Properties also out in the West End.
We had 65 students at Polk throughout the school year last year. So that's almost 8% during the school year.
Yeah, and William Ramsey often has more. And so our mics are competing. And so there's a lot of dynamics to the enrollment that we're definitely going to be taking a look at, I think, over the next 5 years.
I understand that things have changed behind the scenes in that enrollment forecasting is no longer solely an exercise conducted within ACPS.
So we develop them, but we work with the city of Alexandria a lot. We get development data every month from them to look at when new developments are opening. We try to predict them out as best as we can, but that process also goes through review by the Planning and Zoning Department. We work with Carl Moritz, as well as their neighborhood planning division to kind of sign off on the projections. We work together just to make sure that the internal formula, which we've been using forever, is still working. I think we have a pretty great relationship with them. We meet every other week to talk about other things as well, just to make sure, that we're on top of what's happening in the city.
Okay. The audience questions are flooding in. So let's turn to a couple of those. How about this? Wouldn't it be a good idea to replace the public schools with educational vouchers that parents could use to enroll their children in any private school? Aaron?
I would emphatically say no. It would take resources out of our public schools that are necessary to serve our most underprivileged students, our ELL students. And I think that the success we've seen in voucher and charter schools is all from selective parents pulling their kids out of public schools and taking the resources with them. And if we don't serve the most vulnerable population, I don't know what we're doing.
There is a case against vouchers. Carmen, this may be coming your way. Whatever happened to having an international baccalaureate program in Alexandria?
That's a good question. So the MYP, PYP process preceded my time in Alexandria City Public Schools, as well as my position. However, when I first arrived in Alexandria City Public Schools as a dean of students, there was still discussion around the PYP process at the high school. And
PYP process?
oh, my apologies. So the MYP is middle years program, and the PYP is the high school program that allows the students to actually gain an international baccalaureate diploma. And so it is a full-fledged process of really reimagining and transitioning school houses into what IB, International Baccalaureate, puts as a part of their framework and principles. And so that was what was in place. And moving forward, from my understanding, was that Alexandria City Public Schools offers a significant amount of advanced placement courses, dual enrollment courses with Northern Virginia Community College. And so because of the plethora of advanced level courses that were already a part of Alexandria City Public Schools, there was not a need for students to gain an international baccalaureate diploma, as students are currently gaining a plethora of college credits as students currently at the Alexandria City High School. One of the seniors 2 years ago left the high school with 22 college credits. And so that is overwhelming.
Don't do that.
Yeah, that is incredibly overwhelming, which means that this student was taking AP and dual enrollment courses as they entered the 9th grade.
I know I'm supposed to moderate, not testify, but I will tell you from memory that a lot of the dual enrollment and advanced placement teachers were not wild about international baccalaureate, but were not enthusiastic. Progress reporting. The publication of proficiency percentage data, SOL pass rates, reading and math, that kind of thing. Here's a questioner who says, I've been waiting for 50 years. I want to know if students are advancing, not whether or not they hit a standard. Should we be focusing more on the distance traveled or the distance that a student progresses than on pass rate percentages?
So I think that centers around what your values and beliefs are. I'm not sure if many of you have followed what Governor Youngkin has called the honesty gap. When Virginia schools went up against all of the other states in the United States of America, we were the lowest scoring on the NAEP assessment. And I think that with that knowledge, there has been conversations around how to continue to increase the level of rigor within our standards of learning, to include curriculum and instructional practices. And so I think with that in mind, that is what really drives how we approach our students. We want our students to be incredibly knowledgeable in acquiring new skills and knowledge within their classrooms through what we call 3 instructional practices and what we focus on in Alexandria City Public Schools. And that's alignment to our standards of learning. Our revised standards of learning are coming down continuously from the Virginia Department of Education. This year, math and literacy were implemented. Next year will be social studies and revised standards for science. And then in January, we will have revised computer science standards. And so I say all that to say, as we're talking about alignment, we're talking about increase in ensuring that cognitive and content levels are being taught, the appropriate content and cognitive levels are being taught by our teachers. We talk about rigorous work, ensuring that students become the facilitators of their own learning and have opportunities for hands-on learning. And then we also talk about engagement. How are we continuing to bring all of our students into a space of understanding and skill based on the content area that they're engaging in? So that's our work, and we will continue to really focus in on our students making progress, and then how can we continue to accelerate their learning.
Anybody else want to focus in on this question of reporting results? Aaron?
I'll make a comment that I think teachers are some of the people I respect most and have admiration for what they do for our kids. And I can't think of a thing that they have more disdain or frustration with SOLs than some of the reporting. So these teachers have to have masters and they're well trained. If that's their frustration, I'd have to stand behind them.
Okay. Here's a question that is interesting and to me from a historical perspective, so I'm going to violate the moderator handbook again. Was there an option to place the Minnie Howard Campus on the Chinquapin land space to create a mega campus? That was the Chinquapin Circle was actually considered as a site now the King Street building, and the blowback on that was fierce. And so I think probably the Minnie Howard site was more of a likely option. Panel, any disagreement?
Not a disagreement, and I'm just in agreement with you, Mark, around the idea that when we were on the educational design team, and like I said, preceded my time here in this actual position, there was a significant amount of scanning of the city for potential schools and property for a new high school, and it was limited. It was very limited, and those who did have land wanted to sell it to commercial owners and industries, and so we talked about that significantly as we talked about designing education for students and ensuring that teachers had the appropriate space, and so that was a challenge for us during that time.
All right. Now, a few minutes ago, I asked you to roll back 20 years with me, a generation. And now I'm going to ask you to move forward a few months. March 13th, 2025 is a few months away. That day will be the 5-year anniversary of the day, that Friday, that we all went home because of something called COVID. And the general understanding was we'd be out for 2 weeks, come back, life would continue. And you know the rest of the story. So where are we really, in your view, in terms of recovery from the pandemic, from learning loss? And before I let you get after this, let me say that according to a report released this week by the Center for Reinventing Public Education, CREEP, I don't know them, but they obviously have got great marketing, which is a research group at Arizona State. The impact of that has studied the impact of COVID on education since 2020. The average American student is less than halfway to full academic recovery. Okay, I've never met the average American student, and so that's probably a flawed study in some respects. But what's your view in terms of how we've made it back or are making it back from COVID?
I would say it's hard to tell, obviously, as a student, what other people are doing, how other students are doing. But I would say an issue that's not talked about as much that is just as important, if not more important, is social and emotional recovery in the aftermath of COVID. So you look at where we are socially as teenagers, as high schoolers, and I mean, all the way down to the elementary level, it's significant, the social skills that have been lost. And, you know, we've had some programs to try to improve that have had good intentions, but they haven't worked very well. And I think that we need to put more effort into student well-being and student freedom and flexibility during the day to have times where you can engage in, you know, opportunities like you would have in real life that we've lost from COVID, like engaging with you know, peers, go visiting teachers, getting assigned, like catching up on work, more flexible time in the day to kind of mimic the real world and catch up on some of those social skills that we've lost. So yeah.
Carmen, from my time in the classroom, James, I echo the applause. From my time in the classroom, what you were doing was snaps. Tell me why you were snapping when James was speaking.
Because I felt that it was a great segue to the continued work that we're doing in Alexandria City Public Schools. As James mentioned, oftentimes from a student lens, you're not necessarily sure how other students are doing or necessarily what's being done at different levels to really address some of the concerns that we're seeing overall. And one of the things that we've talked about for the last 3 years is how to really address social, emotional, and academic learning. We've used that language interchangeably, and the reality is that social emotional learning is incredibly important before you can get to academic learning. So when we talk about students going into learning brain, if they're not in learning brain, then they're not going to be able to access any content that the teacher is teaching. And so making sure that the hearts are ready so the minds can be ready. And so that is what we're working on very intentionally with the Department of Student Services and Equity, Department of Teaching, Learning, and Leadership, Department of Student Services and Equity, and merging it in to all of the practices that we are presenting as it relates even to the curriculum and how to approach lessons from a social emotional lens. And we're incredibly excited about that because the more that we make it visible for our teachers in written curriculum, the more they'll be able to build those positive connections and engage our students in a really meaningful and relevant way.
Aaron, your daughters were probably in the school system in the very primary grades when COVID.
Yeah, my oldest daughter was in kindergarten, and then so my daughter in second grade, she didn't get to experience the remote school, but I would say, like, we know there's a gap and we haven't caught back up, but as a parent, it's starting to feel more normal getting your kids to school, and so that is helpful. I would highlight being back in person helps serve our most vulnerable population, and my daughter benefits from this in that she has some special service she needs. There's no way she would have gotten this in remote school.
Okay, all right. Others? All right. We have two questions that relate to, of course, Bradley Shopping Center. Everybody's favorite place. I'm going to read them both, and then and I realize that you know, as I said in the opening, the school system is so diverse. We don't have everybody from every conceivable function here. So, let me try this on you and see what you think. The two questions are: how do you fix the drug and violence issues that happen at Bradley Shopping Center? What can you do to have a better relationship with Bradley Shopping Center and the surrounding community? Students stealing, smoking, drug and alcohol, and terrorizing patrons. Okay, so there's a generalized concern among some in the room about the safety of Bradley Shopping Center. Any thoughts?
Yeah, if I can start on this one. So this is obviously a very tough topic to talk about, but I'll say that a lot of what is said about Bradley is way over the top and overdone in terms of the exaggeration, or maybe some people have had these experiences, but if you go in Bradley Shopping Center on a typical day, like if you go there 5 times in 1 week, the vast majority of those times, you're not going to be scared out of there by a teenager. Like, it's really overblown, the situation. And obviously, there have been things that have happened there that have been terrible, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. And I think that there's been a bit of irresponsible journalism in the city building up a problem that doesn't really exist at the point that it's built up to. So there's also a lot of criminalization of students. Students are not, trying to leave school to go do terrible things. They're not doing that. That's not really something that's happening at the extent that it's portrayed. So I would say try to be open with this issue and view it through a lens that students aren't trying to do bad things and that they're just teenagers. So.
And what, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I was talking with Sheriff Casey today, and he had a poignant point about we're a big little city, and being little, like, it feels like it's right next door. And so I think a lot of people feel that way about Bradley. It feels like it's right there. I've noticed increased police presence, and I think I'd like that. I feel safe when I go there, but I certainly can understand why people have issues or concerns.
Sure.
Yeah, and
Carmen.
what James stated, the reality is that if there are students at Bradley, we want them in school, especially if it's during school hours. And so it is our responsibility, as it relates to leadership and what we can do as the adults in buildings to draw our students back and ensure that they feel that this is a place where they are going to learn, that they're going to be welcome, that they're going to create relationships that are going to be impactful for their lives. And so I think that is also a responsibility of the schools. And that is what we are continuing to do to re-engage our students.
And I'll just say one more thing. So I think that right now, Bradley is very different than Bradley coming out of COVID. So when we think about the social emotional well-being and the social skills that school brings back once you're in school, that the students are at a different place than they were coming immediately out of COVID. So I'm sure, at a time, Bradley was not the place to be, to say the least. But now there has been progress, and there's way, way, way less students there during the school day. Very, very few students there during the school day, I would say. Yeah.
It might be useful to remember that this is not a new issue, and that there are some folks who are disturbed by the sight of students who would ordinarily be in school not being in school. I was elected to the school board on the platform that I would be the man who would end off-campus lunch at the high school. It's very effective. All right. In recent years, ACPS's watchword or singular focus seemed to be, in a single word, equity, which loosely defined seemed to be to each according to their needs. Is this true still? If not, how have things changed? Any thoughts on that?
I have thoughts, but I wanted to open it up to my panel
Anybody
members.
else?
I have some thoughts. I think the school board does lots of things to provide services to our community that have been pretty great. But I also look at our long-term investment and overcrowding in the West End and how it affects many more ELL students and socioeconomic issues. And I look at our investments in the future, and these are areas that already have capacity and utilization space. So it's a little tough. And I believe last year, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights actually had an investigation about some of the equity concerns.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Is the equity still the lodestar?
So I'll just respond to that real quick. Equity isn't something that you achieve, it's something you have to practice. And so sometimes you're not going to make the mark, right? And so I think as we go into this next CIP process, as we think about redistricting and trying to rebalance those inequities, for me at least, it's very hard because I have to take a system lens. And so, you know, when I say, you know, you have to take it at a system-wide level, that's hard to say to you, right? So, you know, I think there are good things that we can achieve with equity through the K-8 analysis, through redistricting, and trying to get to that place, not just through dollars, because one, we are adding capacity. We will be adding net new seats to the elementary school level, and through redistricting, you can balance those. I don't disagree with Mr. Thomas, but I also have to acknowledge kind of this system-wide effort that we put into the CIP. And enrollment and capacity aren't the only considerations that go into it. It's also investments in the school. It's, you know, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems costs millions of dollars sometimes. Roofs cost $2 million, and we've made improvements to a lot of different schools, not only in the West End, but also in the East End, but not to George Mason and not to Cora Kelly. Those buildings are highly inadequate in terms of the learning and the way that they were built. And so, yeah, and I welcome the discussion of it, so.
I will recognize that it's not easy for the school board. And times we feel like we're being pushed to wait for redistricting, but I also understand the city has a history with redistricting. I believe there have been lawsuits by communities against the school board before, so I know that's not something they look at lightly. So I'll at least recognize some of those. And I think there's some school board members that were up to 11 the other day, just hearing about plans for George Mason, so it's not an easy job.
Okay. James.
Sorry. Okay. Can I just say quickly something?
James and then Carmen, have I got that right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
About on an operational level, that is like, for me, I'm more on the day-to-day level. That's like a pretty big, zoomed out 3,000-foot view of what's going on. But as a student, you see equity preached a lot and practiced less. And I don't think that's intentional, but I just think that's the way things have worked out in not all aspects, but in some aspects. So, for example, this is like a very zoomed in example, but at Alexandria City High School, you cannot eat lunch outdoors without getting enough reward. And in outdoor, it's an enclosed area, so it's not like you can go leave. But you cannot eat lunch outdoors without getting enough, like we call them Minga points on your phone that get awarded throughout the day to students. So if you don't have enough points, you can't go outside. And when you have point systems like that study after study shows that rewards-based point systems are biased, and they're not equitable ways of evaluating people in general. When you have something like that for something as basic as going outside during the school day, honestly, to me, it just seems a little bit ridiculous. And so there's lots of little things in terms of equity like that. When you zoom in, equity is not being practiced as it may be preached on the wider level. So yeah, that was just one example.
So I'm going to come from a curriculum and instruction perspective. Some of you may have asked, what is the executive director of instructional support do? And so under my purview is content area, general education content areas, and programs. And when I think about equity, I think about how curriculum and instruction can be equity levers, and how we help students see themselves in the content that is being taught, how we respond to students' needs, whether it is a student with a disability, whether it's someone from, a diverse cultural and linguistic background, whether it's someone from lower economically disadvantaged socioeconomic status. I think that how we approach equity should be that they are able to see themselves in everything that we do and say in the classrooms. And so to answer your question, Mark, the reality is that we are still absolutely striving to be a school division that meets the needs of our students exactly where they are. And are we perfect and have we met the mark? No, we are still working towards that, because what people fail to realize is that equity work is introspective. That's people work, right? It's changing hearts and it's changing minds. It's not something that you can drill down from the top and say, you must do this. You have to help people along their journey towards equity. And I think that we are transitioning to a space in Alexandria City Public Schools where we're really talking about justice. And we are interrogating the systems that have been put into place that have caused these disparate outcomes for students and populations that have historically been underserved and disenfranchised. And so I think that is our continued work. And for all intents and purposes, I don't think it's our intention to let up on that. And that's serving all of our students, whether you're a student with a disability or our gifted learners.
Okay.
So,
Panel, I'm now going to show you a controversial device in education. Are you ready? All right. You know, I believe that Governor Youngkin has issued an executive order requesting school systems to restrict, ban, control the use of cell phones during the academic day. I think you know that there's legislation to that effect in the General Assembly. You know that at, I believe, Bishop Ireton, there is a ban currently in effect. What is your view on student use of cell phones during the academic day?
Well, as a parent, I don't know how I survived to college without a cell phone, but my kids think differently. I'm personally slightly supportive of this measure, but I talked to a lot of parents, and post Sandy Hook and school shootings, and even during COVID, there's a lot of parents that want to be in touch with their kids if they need to be. So I think you're going to be hard for all to win it, but I'm personally at least slightly for it.
Slightly for, okay. James?
I'll start by saying that this measure is it's guidance. So it doesn't, the school board has not always followed the guidance from VDOE. And I think that's fairly common for school boards across Virginia because there's no kind of penalty if you don't follow it. So I'll start by saying that. But I think that everyone in the school knows that phones are a hindrance to learning. And there's no one that is going to say that's not true. And if they do say that, they'd be lying to you. But phones have also become a part of everyday life in this age. And it's really, really hard when you have responsibilities outside of school. When we go back to equity, you know, if you have a shift later today after school, you're working, and your boss texts you to change time, like that you need to change times or whatever, and you can't respond because you don't have your phone, that's an issue. And depending on the boss, you know, you might get, like, yeah, I've heard students be worried about getting fired just based on that. But in general, the student Chromebooks have this thing called Securely on them, which blocks a lot of websites. And at least once a day, I have to use my phone to actually get some instructional work done. So if we are going to put this ban in effect, we need like a complete overhaul of the technology services that we have. You know, Minga, we invested, I think, hundreds of thousands, maybe not hundreds, at least tens, into a tech company called Minga, where we scan our digital ID every day. You're not allowed to use a physical ID anymore. It has to be digital. So if we can't have phones, then that's basically all wasted. There's a lot more nuance to the issue than it seems. So,
Carmen?
I'm going to date myself a little bit. But I remember a time, just as a high school student, where we could have our cell phones in the building and we had to put them in our lockers. And then September 11th happened. And the policy did not change. We still had to put our cell phones in the lockers. And I will tell you that nobody from my class passed out. Nobody just lost themselves because they didn't have their cell phones. when I transitioned into teaching, one of the focus areas at the time was how do we utilize 21st century tools for learning? And one of them was the cell phone. I was in a school division that did not have one-to-one laptops like Alexandria City Public Schools, and so it really became a tool for my students at the time. When they would come into their classroom, their activator would be on pole everywhere, and they would have to respond on their phones, and then they could see their peers' responses to our opening activator question pop up on my smart board. And so, but now, as I mentioned, we did not have one-on-one laptops. And where I've seen cell phones go is that it was always my hope that they be used for good and not evil. And unfortunately, what we've seen is a transition of, cell phones not being used for learning purposes. Instead, they've been used for other purposes that have been incredibly damaging to either themselves or their peers. And so, as James mentioned, this is not something that falls within the realm of anybody here. That is something that the school board would have to discuss around the guidance that has been passed down through the executive order. I know that VDOE, Virginia Department of Education, has issued some guidance as of September 16th. And so we will await the discussion from our school board around the very topic. So,
Sophie, I thought you looked my way. Did you?
Yeah, just real quick on the infrastructure part of it as well. So I believe that Mark listed off a lot more school districts than I knew had cell phone bans in place, but where I started investigating this was there was actually a pilot program at a middle school, I believe in Prince William or somewhere close. And I thought middle school was interesting. One, because as James mentioned, there are obligations some high schoolers have either to younger siblings or something like that. Also, there's many different ways to do it, I've seen. You can either have it as part of like an unlocking system where the infrastructure is actually built into the school. You can have the little pouches where you actually take your cell phone with you during the day. I'll kind of leave the safety and security to the safety and security folks, but generally, students need to be engaged with their teachers and their administrators during an emergency at the school, not with their cell phones. So that's, first of all, the most important thing. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that out as a point of information.
I would suggest, don't teachers have some influence on this if they choose to exert it?
Yeah. So, well, do you mean about the new policy or just
I mean
in
about
general?
cell phones. If you came into my class and I got on you about cell phone use and I said, James, I want you to put your cell phone in a basket. Just like coat check in a restaurant, we're going to have cell phone check. I'll give it back to you at the end of the period. We're done. Would that be unreasonable?
I don't think that would be unreasonable. And I think that is an implementation of this new policy that I would be supportive of. But I will say that the current policy we have now, technically phones are banned during the school day, other than at lunch and during transition periods. In practice, not at all what's going on, as you may imagine. But I have some teachers, I've been in all types of classes from gen ed, honors, AP, and at least in AP classes, the teachers are a lot more strict about phone usage, and they tell you to put it away. And I have one Spanish teacher, shout out Mr. Templin, but he, if you're on your phone, he doesn't play. You have to put it at the front of the room. He has a whole pocket on the wall, and if you don't do it, he'll get an administrator. So some teachers are like that. Other teachers tell you to put it away, then 5 minutes later, put it away, and nothing happens, as you may imagine. So yeah, a lot of it relies on teachers.
Okay. Other comments? Before we go into a two-part series and exercising the awesome power of the moderator, I'm going to request an answer from each panelist for these two questions. One is, and I'm going slowly here so that you could think about these because I'm intentionally putting you on the spot here. The first of the two-part question series is, from your perspective, what can ACPS, what can the school system do better? That's question number one. And the second one is, what would be the single best thing that could be done for student welfare, for student that would benefit students the most? Okay? All right, so why don't we start with Aaron? Okay. And let's do the first question. From your perspective, what can the school system do better?
I think the number one thing is to focus on communication and transparency. It feels like this past year there's been a little bit of a circling of the wagons. I know we're being heard when we speak out. Dr. Kay Wyatt is going to be at Polk tomorrow addressing the PTA. She's committed to putting a dashboard with enrollment, which you might be involved with, and I'm super excited with. It'll make it a lot clearer for everybody. But there's other periods it took a long time and a lot of advocating to get this stuff. And you hear back with a letter from the superintendent via Parent Square the week before school opens, and that's after, for Samuel Tucker, that's been years. For Patrick Henry, it's been a couple years, and Polk, particularly this past year. We've seen a couple other incidents, like Patrick Henry's been severe shortage of teachers. They had 2 third grade teachers, and parents found out as their kids are coming to school, and for weeks they had substitutes. I think being open with those is better than not. So,
Sophie, what can we do better?
Same answer. No, really. To start off, I think, we have a pretty robust CIP program. And like Mr. Thomas mentioned, the data that has to go into that, the choices that have to be made about strategic resource allocation, I think could benefit from a little bit more powerful software behind it. We've done a lot of work over the past 2 years through assessments, through just different programs, and so I think we've tried to make it easier in the CIP book to find your school, to find what's kind of gone into that. But I think that would require a lot of resources and times on my department, and so that doesn't come easy in terms of full-time employees. So, but software is a pretty powerful tool that you can use either through Powered BI dashboards, through there's a whole industry around facility management that I think we could utilize. And then I think more long-range planning efforts as well. This is more of a preview into my work program than anything, and more of a wish list. But I think we're getting there with the K-8 analysis, with redistricting. But some of you may have been part of the long-range educational facilities plan back in 2015, 2018. I would love to see kind of a new one of those, especially since we've gone through COVID. We know where some of our pressure points are. And, where should we be going in not in the next 10 years, but in the next 20 years? That's really hard to predict, but I think we have a lot of data, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of, honestly, political willpower to start doing that. So,
okay. All right. James, what can we do better? We the ACPS.
I'll say listen is the number one thing. So I've been a part of many committees or groups, working groups, whatever you want to call them.
Did I hear it? Listening.
Yeah, listening. But the amount of times that the work we've done, we've spent hours on, gathering feedback, gathering data, and the opinions of so many stakeholders in the school, for all of it to get basically thrown away and have other plans put in that are in direct contradiction to what the working groups of students and teachers who are actually in the building, what they know needs to happen. That is something that's happened many times, and it's not only my experience. I've talked to so many teachers in the school who have had the same experience. So we wonder why a lot of our administrators within the school division and especially at the high school are leaving. And I think from my perspective, from an observer, it's because there's barely any autonomy anymore. A lot of decisions are being made from a higher level, top-down decisions that have historically been made on a school-wide basis, not coming from above. And I think that listening to those who are actually in the building, who are actually working on stuff, and even just coming in the building and walking through and seeing what it's like more often can really improve the outcomes and decision-making processes.
Okay.
I would say,
Carmen?
thank you.
Well, here's for James. Carmen?
I would say making the learning visible. I think that means a multitude of things. It means ensuring that, there is adequate, robust curriculum for teachers to implement. It means, providing them with research-based, evidence-based practices that are going to help students gain the knowledge and skills that they need by content area, as well as for their social emotional needs. It is ensuring that while they're receiving this curriculum and implementing these instructional practices, that they really have robust job-embedded professional learning, so they feel empowered and confident about what they're doing and what they're implementing. And I say, as we think about this, we're thinking about not only the students as learners, but also the adults as learners, and how do we continue to approach every target group, every audience, from a lens of equity and providing what they need. And so I would say making the visible learning across the division.
Okay. All right. Back to you, Aaron. What's the one thing you would do or recommend to improve the student experience in the school system?
I mean, I've talked about overutilization, so anything we could have done yesterday, but
Okay.
I realize that's not realistic, but I'm still gonna beat that drum and advocate for it.
Okay. Sophie?
I think open space and play is really important to students. I think, not only for elementary students, but as, you've heard James mention, for high school students as well. I really, Douglas MacArthur has a great kind of outdoor learning classroom, and I think, the new George Mason coming up is also going to have a lot of that bringing the outdoors indoors. And I think the new high school, especially once the fields are built, are really going to have that as well. And so that's something I think about every time I go to help design one of the buildings.
James, I saw you snapping.
Yeah, I agree for sure about that, and I was actually going to basically say something very similar. So I'd like to see a time, at least at the high school level, at the high school level, where students have flexibility during the day, like I talked about earlier. And this is something that I've been advocating for very, very fiercely for the last 3 years. And it's been implemented somewhat, but in the last 2 years, but not at all this year. And I'd really like to see it be brought back, where you have a chunk of the day where students are able to go to different teachers, go see their counselors, engage with each other, and do clubs, activities, athletics. We don't have a sense of school community at a school that has a hit movie made after it. So that's not a good thing, and we need to do a lot of work to bring it back.
I had a wonderful time working and listening to student, staff, community members around the high school project. And I would say that across the board, from students from elementary to 12th grade, talked about 3 things. They talked about trust, meaningful relationships, and hands-on learning. And so from the study from 2018 that was done to our learning visits in 2023, it is still the exact same response from our students, that they are wanting adults that they can go to, that they can trust, that they have really positive relationships with, and hands-on learning. And so that is where I think that we can really improve the student experience as it relates to how we approach school overall. It doesn't have to be what we knew, because the students now are different than you and I. The way that they learn, completely different. We are dealing, with multimodal students. They can do multiple things at one time and still get A's and B's and learn all of the things that they need to learn. And so a teacher standing in front of the classroom and lecturing to them is not going to work. And the research is saying that even colleges and universities are changing their instructional approaches at that level. And so we have to take a shift. And I think that it's incredibly important that we embrace what our students are saying that they need and really respond to it.
All right. Okay, back to some audience questions. This is a two-part question. I'm going to try the first one, to answer the first one. Is there a cafeteria at the Minnie Howard campus? I think the answer to that is no, and that was planned. There's a system of distributed dining, and if you want to see it working, it's also the way things are done at Jefferson Houston.
There are like 4 cafeterias.
It looks
So
like a student center
they're
at a college.
yeah.
Like if you, do I have any Hokies in the house? Any? Yes, Mr. Thomas. So if you went to any student center and there were multiple eateries, on the first floor, second floor, third floor, that is exactly what it looks like in action at the Minnie Howard campus. You have your main distribution line on the first floor, and then on the second, third, and fourth floors are your additional distribution lines. And it works fairly well. James, have you been there during lunchtime?
So I'm not at lunch at Minnie, but I lead this group of students all across the school to kind of gather student perspectives on what's going on and present them to our principal, Mr. Duncan. But from that group, what I can say is there's been good feedback about the different cafeteria levels. But the spaces themselves are like lounge areas, couch areas. Those, the feedback is like to have those to be more accessible throughout the day and have more times that those can be used. But lunch is going well.
Okay. So if I have it correctly, we cannot look forward to a headline that says, Agenda Alexandria discussion reveals massive design oversight at new high school building, right?
The parking lot.
Yeah, the parking. All right. Okay. Here's a question. Here's an interesting question, and I'm going to amend it slightly. If the city is going to grow to 180,000 to 200,000 residents, won't we need a second? I'm going to strike second and say third, because I believe we have 2 high schools. We're just thrifty with the name, which is using the name very broadly. A third high school, or a third high school building.
Yeah, I would like to see where that number came from. We work closely with the city. Mark, we talked about not only our work with planning and zoning for our projections, but we also work with them on student generation rates. The city develops them in conjunction with the data that we provide them about where students live. That shows you approximately how many students you can expect to come from some housing development. The majority of our students come from older single-family housing stock, and then the most come from these. I think the more students are generated out of multifamily housing, mostly because more families live there. And so, we have to look at our projections out 10 years. I'd say the first 5 years are the most accurate, and as you go out years, you refine them. We've also seen that a lot of this new market rate multifamily housing is not generating families with students. So. Especially like in the Eisenhower area. Yeah.
As I gather it, you folks are down to the level of granularity where you know the projected yield of students in different types of apartment buildings and townhouses. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how the city does it. It's based off of like garden style apartments or just kind of like what you would see in the Eisenhower area. Yeah.
This is a sea change from the days of the cohort survival method. Right?
Yeah. Which we also still use. But yeah, Mr.
Aaron,
The mayor, when he was talking to the arena deal, he was highlighting that less than 3% of our students come from housing stock under 30 years old.
Yeah.
So as we build a lot of housing stock, a lot of the new stuff isn't bringing as many students.
okay.
Can I say something?
Yes, James?
So, ask any teacher or student at Alexandria City High School, and they'll tell you that we're in dire need of another campus. It's not a question for anyone in the building who's actually living and going through the day-to-day life as a student or teacher. We're severely overcrowded. The new Minnie Howard campus has helped, but it hasn't helped a lot. And the busing back and forth, where you're switching campuses up to 4 times per day, it's not working. We need separate high schools. And I'm confident that every student you ask, almost every student will say that, and 100% every teacher will say that. And also, it's a safety issue too. When you have evacuations that are taking 17 minutes, that's not safe if there's a fire or something worse. So we need smaller student populations at each campus, and yeah.
Okay. All right. All right, another audience.
I just
Sorry,
wanted to
Carmen.
just elevate something that James mentioned. My time in Alexandria, and I remember when the school board voted to do the Connected High School Network and the intention behind it. I think that with additional spaces that can, whether it be through our non-traditional campuses or through another edifice, physical plant that could support more students and teachers in a connected high school network, I think that it would work, right? It would work for us in Alexandria City Public Schools. And so I would like to say that this approach that we have to academies at Alexandria City will help create this clearer path, this community for our students over time. It was just implemented. It was just a month ago. And so, really seeing where that goes and how that impacts the student experience, but from a safety perspective, I remember coming to Alexandria, and King Street campus was probably about 2,300 students at the time. And that was a significant difference than what it was when I came back as the King Street campus administrator. And so to that point, I do feel that there may need to be more spaces that we consider to service our students.
Okay. Panel, you've been great. We are pretty much out of time. I want to let you know that we didn't get to some cherished concerns, and I'll just tell you what they are so that you can take those away and think about them for another time. Out-of-district enrollment, the impact of immigration, the impact of the city's housing plans on the schools, and lots of others. But you've been terrific, and we're very grateful to you. Thanks very much.
All right, one more thing. I just wanted to get a big round of applause for our moderator, Mark Eaton. Thank you so much. So I mentioned that he had a Substack. I didn't name it. It's called About Alexandria. Hit the subscribe button. Go listen. You definitely want to check it out. You can also read his columns in the Alexandria Times. I also wanted to give a shout out to our candidates. Mason Butler, Celiana Gunderson, please stand up right now. Please stand up. These are our candidates running for Alexandria City Council. If you have any questions about their candidacy, you can talk to them in person. Thank you so much. And one more round of applause for our Say it again? And a school board member. Thank you. So, running for school board. See, this is the problem when you talk about candidates, but I appreciate it. I should just shut my big fat mouth. All right. So one more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much, and everyone have a great night.
This is Agenda Alexandria, a nonpartisan organization that takes a look at the issues without taking sides. Whether it's the city's sewer system, education, public safety, climate change, or perhaps a look back into Alexandria's history, Agenda Alexandria is here to shine a light. What makes the organization so successful is our people. The people who run it, our panelists, our moderators, and of course, our members. Agenda Alexandria is a member-funded organization, and we invite you to become one today by visiting agendaalexandria.org.